Imagine a country that has long been a cornerstone of the European Union suddenly shifting its focus eastward, toward Russia, toward China, and potentially into the orbit of BRICS. Hungary, once considered the EU's proverbial black sheep, is now on the verge of a significant geopolitical transformation. The stakes are high, and a critical question arises. Why is Hungary willing to risk alienating the EU in favor of forging stronger ties with Russia and China? What's behind this unprecedented pivot? And what could it mean for Europe, NATO, and the global order? To understand this shift, let's take a step back. Hungary has been a proud member of the European Union since 2004, but over the past several years, under the leadership of Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, the country has increasingly adopted policies that challenge the EU's core principles. The EU, as a political and economic union, has long aimed to ensure that its member states uphold democratic values, the rule of law, and basic freedoms. However, under Orbán, Hungary has pursued a path that undermines these ideals, sparking tensions not only with the EU, but threatening the union's unity as a whole. At the heart of this rift is national sovereignty. Under Orbán, Hungary has felt that the EU has overstepped its boundaries, interfering in domestic matters such as judicial independence, media freedoms, and the protection of traditional values. Many Hungarians, particularly Orbán supporters, see their country as a bastion of conservative Christian values, a stance they believe directly contradicts the EU's more progressive agenda. This has led to a growing disillusionment with Brussels, with a recent survey showing support for the EU has dropped dramatically, from 80% a decade ago to just 47% today. Now, the crucial question is whether the EU is still Hungary's best ally. For Orbán, the answer seems clear. No. Facing increasing pressure from Brussels, Hungary has begun seeking alternative alliances to assert greater control over its national. The pivot toward Russia and China is not just a rhetorical shift. It represents a fundamental change in Hungary's foreign policy and its role within the EU. Hungary's focus on strengthening ties with Russia and China is evident in several areas, notably through trade agreements. One of the most significant moves has been Hungary's decision to join China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, making it the first EU member state to do so. The BRI is a multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure project designed to create a vast network of trade, transportation, and energy links across Asia, Europe, and beyond. While Hungary's participation promises economic benefits, critics argue that it may also tether Hungary closer to Chinese interests, potentially undermining its autonomy. This strategic shift is causing alarm within the EU, which has long emphasized the importance of a unified foreign policy. Hungary's actions, particularly its involvement in the BRI, challenge that unity. The European Union has traditionally championed collective action in international relations, but Hungary's increasingly independent stance threatens to fracture the bloc. This shift isn't just about trade deals, it's about the ideological divide growing within Europe. As Hungary grows closer to the east, it raises the broader question. Is Hungary's pivot a sign of a larger shift within the EU, with some members seeking alignment with Russia and China, while others remain committed to the Western liberal order? Let's take a closer look at Hungary's growing relationship with BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, an emerging bloc that has become a counterweight to Western-dominated institutions. BRICS has become increasingly influential in global trade, and its member states are asserting themselves on the international stage. For Hungary, the appeal is clear. The bloc represents a growing economic force, offering opportunities in energy, infrastructure, and investment. In 2022, BRICS countries accounted for 31% of global GDP, surpassing the G7's 30%. This shift in global economic power is undeniable, and Hungary seems eager to position itself at the forefront of this change by aligning more closely with BRICS nations. However, Hungary's pivot toward Russia and China is not without challenges, particularly in the energy sector. Despite EU sanctions on Russia following its invasion of Ukraine, Hungary has continued to import Russian natural gas. This puts Hungary at odds with other EU member states who have sought to isolate Russia economically. Hungary argues that energy security is a national priority and that it cannot afford to sever ties with Russian energy supplies. About 85% of Hungary's gas imports still come from Russia. This dependence creates risks for Hungary, both in its relationship with the EU and its position in global geopolitics. Energy security is a dilemma many European nations face, balancing the need for stable energy supplies with pressure to reduce reliance on Russian energy. For Hungary, it's a high-stakes balancing act, navigating its energy needs while distancing itself from EU sanctions. Hungary's foreign policy shift also extends to military support for Ukraine. Amid the ongoing war, Hungary has vetoed EU military aid to Ukraine, arguing that further support could escalate tensions and endanger Hungary's national security. This controversial position has strained Hungary's relationship with both the EU and NATO. Hungary's refusal to support Ukraine's military efforts raises questions about its commitment to NATO's collective security goals, creating a delicate situation as Hungary seeks to maintain its autonomy while remaining within the NATO framework. Additionally, Hungary has delayed Sweden's NATO membership, citing national security concerns. Some analysts suggest Russia's influence is playing a role in this hesitation, as Sweden has been one of the EU's most vocal critics of Hungary's democratic backsliding. Hungary's veto of Sweden's NATO bid may also be seen as a strategic move to assert its independence from EU pressures, signaling that it will not be easily coerced into Finally, let's turn to Hungary's growing relationship with China. As the only EU country openly supporting China's Belt and Road Initiative, Hungary's alignment with Beijing underscores the depth of its pivot toward the East. Hungary is seeking to carve out a new role on the global stage, one that challenges the EU's traditional alliances and embraces new economic and political opportunities. The question now is whether Hungary's shift will stand as a lone outlier within the EU or whether it marks the beginning of a broader transformation in European geopolitics. In the end, Hungary's decision to drift away from the EU and toward Russia and China is a high-stakes gamble that could reshape its future and reverberate across Europe, NATO, and the global order. The long-term consequences remain to be seen, but one thing is certain. Hungary's geopolitical shift is a signal of the changing dynamics in global power. Hungary is positioning itself as a key intermediary between Europe and Asia, forming partnerships that have spurred significant investments in infrastructure, technology, and education. These partnerships open new opportunities for the country. However, Hungary's growing relationship with China comes with notable risks. Critics argue that Hungary's increasing reliance on Chinese investments could threaten its sovereignty, as China might use its economic influence to sway Hungary's political decisions. Hungary's participation in China's Belt and Road Initiative promises short-term economic growth and infrastructure development. Yet it also creates long-term dependencies that may shape the country's future trajectory. In 2022, Chinese investments in Hungary surpassed $1 billion, primarily in the transportation and energy sectors. While these investments offer an economic boost, the long-term implications of Hungary's growing ties with China remain uncertain. The central question is, what happens when Hungary's obligations to China come due? Will its growing ties with China and Russia signal the beginning of a shift in global power dynamics? Hungary's strategic pivot toward Russia, China, and the BRICS group marks a significant turning point in its foreign policy, with potentially far-reaching consequences for the European Union, NATO, and the broader global order. As Hungary strengthens its relationships with the East, it risks fracturing EU unity and unsettling established geopolitical alliances. The world will be watching closely to see how this shift impacts global power dynamics. Hungary's deepening ties with BRICS and its growing relationship with China and Russia represent more than just a diplomatic shift. They challenge the long-standing global order. The expanding presence of BRICS and its push for alternative financial systems could reshape the structure of international relations in the coming years. Hungary's move towards BRICS is part of a broader trend, as nations reconsider traditional alliances and seek more diverse partnerships, especially in response to what they perceive as Western dominance or neglect. Hungary's decision to align with BRICS countries, which are not only economic heavyweights but also political powers, signals a shift in the geopolitical landscape. Hungary's pivot could encourage other countries, particularly in the EU, to reassess their relationships with the West. Dissatisfaction is brewing in nations like Poland and Italy, which share some of Hungary's sentiments about the EU, suggesting the possibility of a political shift that could ripple through the Union. Rising Euroscepticism and increasing support for national sovereignty among EU citizens could pave the way for a new era of political realignments in Europe. The EU, Historically, an organization based on economic interdependence and collective decision-making could soon face a test of its unity as member states like Hungary pursue their own geopolitical strategies. The traditional EU framework, driven by cooperation and shared economic interests, could come under serious. Hungary's commitment to its new alliances, regardless of the EU's stance, highlights the growing struggle between national interests and collective European action. This geopolitical shift could inspire other EU countries to align themselves with Hungary's position, challenging the EU's internal cohesion and sparking a reimagining of Europe's global role. Hungary's involvement in China's Belt and Road Initiative and its growing economic ties with Russia further complicate the situation. Hungary could become a vital link in the development of trade routes connecting Asia and Europe. While this offers tremendous economic potential, it also places the country in a delicate position. Aligning with China and Russia risks provoking tensions with its traditional EU allies, particularly as China's influence in the region continues to grow. The long-term effects of Hungary's position on the European Union and its future economic stability remain uncertain. The economic implications for Hungary are both promising and risky. Increased trade with China and Russia could lead to immediate benefits, such as infrastructure projects and job creation in sectors like technology and manufacturing. However, over-reliance on these new partners could leave Hungary vulnerable in the future, especially if global markets or political alliances shift. There is also a real risk of economic isolation from the EU, particularly if Hungary's new direction continues to clash with broader EU policies. Hungary's leadership, particularly Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, has made it clear that Hungary will not bow to external pressure, especially on matters of energy policy and military defense. Orbán's steadfast stance on sovereignty indicates that Hungary is prepared to face potential EU sanctions or trade restrictions. However, this could further isolate Hungary from the rest of Europe, forcing the country to navigate an increasingly complex geopolitical landscape. The path Hungary chooses will have lasting implications not only for its own future, but also for the future of the EU and the broader global order. The decisions Hungary makes in the coming years will determine its position in a world that is increasingly divided along geopolitical lines. As the global balance of power shifts, countries like Hungary are poised to play a pivotal role in shaping international relations. Hungary's actions will have far-reaching consequences, challenging existing global norms and sparking debates about the future of international alliances. As Hungary forges its new path, the EU and the rest of the world will need to reassess their strategies for navigating a more fragmented and unpredictable global stage. So, what does the future hold for Hungary and the EU? Will Hungary's decision lead to a broader reconfiguration of the global order? Or will it result in a more isolated and vulnerable position for the country? Only time will tell. However, what is certain is that Hungary's move toward BRICS is more than just a shift in foreign policy. It is a reflection of the evolving power dynamics of the 21st century. If you're intrigued by these developments and want to stay updated on global trends, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Join our growing community of insightful thinkers. You can also explore another video from our channel now.